images of people unable to survive in their home countries and unable to migrate and settle in a new country. As migrants from Syria pass through one country after another looking for a new home, many of us are forced to acknowledge how privileged we are simply to have a home. During this time, I also reflected on how much of the Bible, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament, is concerned with issues of migration. From the Exodus to the exile, from Jesus' walkabout around Galilee to the missionary journeys of Paul, migration is not just an issue in the Bible, it is the issue. Most of the texts of the Bible are concerned with being strangers in a strange land, with the global issues of empires that create displaced people, and the question, does God go with us if we are in a strange land? So I chose 3 readings for today that are central for both Jews and Christians on the theology of place and lack of place. Listen again to Deuteronomy 26, a myth of origins for the Israelites. It's a myth because it gives a meaningful narrative to how Israelites viewed themselves. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. You mean he wasn't originally an Israelite? He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien. Few in number, there he became a great nation, a model minority, mighty in populace. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us, we cried out, in Egypt, mind you, to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice in Egypt and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. God brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. This little passage has been cherished for almost 3,000 years. It is important both for defining ancient Israelites as immigrants and is controversial today in the state of Israel for defining Palestinians as immigrants as well. But notice that it is the labor of the Israelites in Egypt that the Lord sees as they make bricks for the great empire. The Lord saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord hears migrant laborers. Centuries passed, and when 400 years of an independent kingdom came to an end in the exile, many Israelites became forced migrants to Egypt and Babylon. Psalm 137 gives voice to another cry of strangers in a strange land. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." But how could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you. Remember the homeland, the psalm says, and never let it fade from your memory. And yet in the United States, we ask immigrants to forget their homeland and become American. Speak English, don't wear head coverings, assimilate, stop being different, be a model minority. When we move to Mark 6, Jesus is in a slightly different situation. He interrupts his wanderings and returns to his hometown. You know, to relax, get some of mom's home cooking, and catch a game on TV. But the Gospel of Mark is unrelenting in showing that Jesus is always in motion, always an alien, even in his hometown. The people had heard about his miracles, but also knew him from his childhood. He was only the guy that they knew. Imagine if someone you went to junior high with turned out to be, like Son of God. A prophet is not without honor, says Jesus, except in his own hometown. And the Gospel of Mark says something that is truly remarkable. Jesus could not perform many miracles there because they didn't support him through faith. Despite his successes elsewhere, out on the road, Jesus was no longer at home in his hometown and left again to become a perpetual migrant. And so after thinking of texts like these, which dominate the Bible, I also reflected on my own situation. In foundations and visions processes, we study target and non-target categories. And in most of these exercises, I am in the non-target category. I'm a white, male, heterosexual, middle-class person, reasonably able, and a native-born citizen. I converted to Judaism, which places me in a target position in terms of religion. But frankly, I have never experienced targeted behavior about that myself, although my wife has, and I address it more as a social issue for others than a target experience for me. But I also came from a target group in being from a poorer, rural Kentucky upbringing. When I grew up, I entered the middle class financially, which solved the surface problems of being struggling class, but it didn't solve the problem of being from hillbillies. I would never change that, and I'm not even tempted to. But seeing the hillbilly stereotypes on TV and hearing joke after joke about hillbillies and incest makes me realize, time and time again, how society needs so many target groups that are considered inferior without reflecting. This is why in foundations class, the list of targeted groups is so long. But I honestly thought that migration was a category in which I was the farthest from being targeted in regard to migration. I was perhaps the least targeted person in the EDS community. My father was an amateur genealogist, and even poor Kentuckians are obsessed with genealogy. He had followed his family tree of the Willses from central Kentucky back through what is now West Virginia to Virginia, and confirmed that our branch of the Willses had been in the United States for 350 years. We know that all notions of immigrant in the United States are relative. Native Americans were already here, and then came wave after wave of immigrants, each of which looked down on the next as just off the boat, with African Americans brought here against their will. Donald Trump has demonized recent immigrants, but his mother was a Scottish immigrant, and his grandfather a German immigrant. I could, of course, point out to Donald Trump that his family is very new to our shores. But in the wake of the recent issues in the news about migration, I also reflect on different aspects of my family story. My ancestors, who were U.S. citizens of long standing, were living in exodus, moving west from Virginia through West Virginia to Kentucky, clearing land for new farmstead after new farmstead, sometimes fighting and killing Native Americans. But that is the part I learned in books. Let's return to what we started with today, a myth of origins. For poor white Kentuckians, the myth was our ownership of the land. My father grew up in Henry County, Kentucky, and his family had lived on that farmstead for about 100 years. But he thought of it as an eternity, as a land given to his family by God. He thought of it as bigger than the Exodus. Once when he and my mother visited Shelley and me in Boston, he came into our living room, sat down, and gave me a plastic pill case filled with soil from his family's farm in Henry County. The dirt from Henry County, Kentucky was like the water of the Ganges River in India, and he assumed that I would keep it in a treasured place. White entitlement in the context of immigration means that you can concoct a myth of an eternal ownership of the land, that you can take on the role as the welcoming committee that either allows immigration or rejects the next group that comes along. White entitlement means that you can ignore the known history as to how recently your own ancestors arrived, a Scottish mother for Donald Trump and a German grandfather. And you can believe that God, or something greater than God, gave you the land that you own. Myth is strong and it does not care about fact.